Okay, let's see. There's that. Soon I will be with you. I'm pretty sure. Oh, there we go. Up. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Israel Travelogue. I don't know if this is 10 or 11 or what it is. I think I put number 10 up there, but I have no idea. But, yeah, another week in here all by myself and waiting until the day that we can have everybody together again. So, yeah, we're going to look today at our time in Israel. I think it's day in Israel, it's like day 6, day 5 to 6, something like that. Anyways, this is Nazareth that you see there. That's where we left off last week, and we are going to pick up there and travel on from Nazareth to, and that's the Jezreel Valley there behind David. Jezreel Valley, where most of the book of Judges took place. It was a beautiful day. There's Nazareth. Okay, so we left Nazareth, and as I say every single time that I do this, if you have questions, please ask them, and they will actually kind of pop up in front of me, and we'll see how many of them I can actually answer, but at least I like questions. All right, so we left Nazareth, which is right here, just to kind of give you an idea of where everything is. Capernaum is up here, where Jesus was from. This is Nazareth, where he was raised. Capernaum is where he spent his time in the ministry. And we left Nazareth and kind of cruised down here through the lower Galilee to Bet-Shan. Bet-Shan, I don't know. I can't pronounce it correctly. This gives you just a bigger picture. Jerusalem is down here. Jesus' home base during his ministry time is there. And so what that means is most of the time when he went back and forth to Jerusalem, he would have traveled right past Bet-Shan. And Bet-Shan is one of the 10 cities of the Decapolis. The Decapolis is the, let me click forward to French fries, and that's probably not a great place to get. There's Bet-Shan National Park. There is a pretty flower. There are the Bet-Shan cats. There were cats everywhere we went in Israel. And there is a map of Bet-Shan. Okay, so the Decapolis is literally the 10 cities. Deca is 10. Polis is cities. So the Decapolis is the 10 cities. You hear about the Decapolis in the Gospels. They are the area that is on the other side of the lake, which is kind of where rebellious kids went when they wanted to see the world. And so if you were with us when we talked about Capernaum, you saw kind of how small Capernaum was. When we look at Bet-Shan, it is a completely different world. And it's a massive Roman city. It is probably the leading city of the Decapolis in the lower Galilee, and was one of the larger, kind of the regional capital, I guess you could call it. And you can see there's a Colosseum, there's a amphitheater. It was a tradition. It was a typical Roman city in the first century, and Jesus would have walked at least by it several times each year, unless he had to go through Samaria, which one time we know in John chapter 4, John says he had to go through Samaria. So, this is Bet-Shan, and it actually is. It plays a part in the Old Testament, too. It didn't look like this at the time. We'll talk about that when we get to the top of the tell. Oh, there we go. So we got inside of the kind of walls of the city, I guess you could say. And if you look at this is the ancient city. This is the whole thing. What we are going to see as we go into, this is kind of where we are right now, looking at this model, right? We're going to walk through some walls, and we are going to end up right here by the amphitheater. And that's what is through those doors there, the amphitheater. And this is one of the most well-preserved Roman cities outside of Rome itself, maybe. It is absolutely amazing how much of it is left. That's the amphitheater, which I don't know if it blows your mind. It blew my mind. We walked through those doors that were back there. We walked through there, and we came out to that. And I was amazed. But that's what you've got there. That's what you've got there with all of that. There are people down there that are actually sitting in the amphitheater. They sometimes use this amphitheater still to this day. Oh, that's probably what I'm missing. There, how's that? To this day, they use the amphitheater, and when, like David, this is our host, he was talking to us, our guide, we could hear him perfectly, but of course he was right there, and we had little earphones in that helped us to understand everything that he was saying. He has a little microphone on. I could hear everything that the teacher, he's kind of standing behind David down there on the ground. I could hear everything that he was saying. And so yeah, amazing how the amphitheater effect works. Now, the reason this is so well preserved is because there was an earthquake in like 749 AD, something like this, and the city was already starting to kind of not be as important. And so when everything kind of fell down, and you'll see some pictures here in a few minutes of columns on the ground, they just decided, you know what, it's not worth it. And they walked away from it. And over time, it just kind of got covered up. And when the archaeologists came along in the 1950s or whenever it was, they dug it all up, and this is what they found. And so, yeah, there it is. Thousands of people could have sat in this amphitheater. And you can see kind of as you look out the rest of the city, walking back through the tunnels and going down into the main city. So, I mean, doesn't have a whole lot to do with Jesus other than the fact that he walked by there, and it never occurred to me that there were these incredibly Roman cities, massive Roman cities, other than Jerusalem, throughout what is now Israel. This is a bathhouse, is what this is. These are little supports and pipes to a certain extent. And there was marble floor that went across the top of those. And from outside, slaves would pump in hot air, and so it was how they took a steam. Okay, there we go. Little brick pillars, and that's them right there. Supported the raised floor of the hot rooms, hot air circulating through the underground space. Hypocaust. Heated the marble floor in the room above. Outside the building, fire stoked in a furnace by slaves sent hot air under the floors, through the clay pipes, into the walls and chimneys to the roof. The floors and walls became so hot that the heat could be as dry as in a sauna or as steamy as in a Turkish bath. And so that's kind of a picture of what the whole bathhouse back then would have looked like. And that's just kind of looking down the rest of the city from the bathhouse. Got out of there, started walking down the road. It was kind of interesting. It's really slanted. It's a pretty good slant there. Not as slanted as my driveway. Those of you who know my driveway know that that's not a false fact. But it's slanted pretty good. And the reason is because as horses took chariots up and down these avenues, they wanted to make it so that when they answered the call of nature, any liquid would just sort of automatically run out into the gutters, and any solid matter would be easy to kind of push in that direction. So it just blows me away that it's that well preserved. It floors me. And these columns that are standing here, they weren't standing after the earthquake. The archaeologists came in, and where they could, they stood things back up to kind of show you what it would have looked like. It was a beautiful day. And that hill, I know how it looks kind of like, oh yeah, it's just this little hill right behind this place. That is way, way up there. And I climbed up there to see what was up there. That's the tell. That's the Bet Shan that was there. I mean, 3000 BC. And it was there throughout the reign of, throughout the judges, throughout King Saul, King David, King Solomon. I mean, it was just that's where the city was, up there. Well, probably back in 3000 BC, it was down here somewhere, but as it got destroyed and then rebuilt, eventually made its way up to there. See, there's where the columns had fallen down and broken. You can get an idea of this beautiful marble or limestone or whatever it is. It's like it still looks good. Okay, so that's not me, actually. That's a Canadian pastor and his wife. I said, hey, wave and I'll take your picture and send it to you. So they did. But yeah, that hill that I was showing you, this is the stairs going up to that hill. And I mean, it took 10 minutes to get up there, I'm guessing. There I am, way up there. So, it's like what I showed you, it looked like that hill was just right above. Oh no, not even close. From down below, this thing looked like a carved god of some kind. And I was like, what is that thing? It looks like a and then we got up there and it was just a tree. It's like, huh. But it has they've tried to make it so that it won't fall. I don't know if it's some special tree. That I did not look into. Now this is the ruins of the ancient city, Bet Shan. You can kind of see walls, just kind of the areas that they had marked out. 3000 BC. Ancient. And this is, like I said, would have been up there at the time of the judges and at the time of King Saul. As a matter of fact, so this is from the top of the tell looking out the other side, right? Behind me then is the city, Bet Shan, and in front of me is, eventually you get far enough out there and you've got the Jezreel Valley, which that means, remember how when I was showing you from Nazareth, probably out in this area somewhere is where I took the pictures of the Jezreel Valley coming this direction. This is now from way on the other side, taking a picture of the same valley, but going the other way. Nazareth is out here somewhere out there. But the Bet Shan's claim to fame in the Bible is that when King Saul and his sons are defeated in the final battle where King Saul is killed, Jonathan is killed, and Israel loses just this horrific battle, the people of Bet Shan are the ones, it's like they bring, the victors take the bodies of King Saul, Jonathan, the other important Israelites, they bring them and they hang them from the walls of Bet Shan right here. And so when that happens, if you know the story, later on that night, some people from around sneak up, cut them down, and bring the bodies back to David. And David is not happy at what they've done to the bodies of King Saul, and Bet Shan doesn't fare very well. So just pictures of what it kind of would have looked like. So we went back to Ein Gev, back to the Sea of Galilee. It was our last night. I was very sad. So was everybody else. We were like, we don't want to go back to Jerusalem. When I showed you pictures from Mount Arbel, and I was telling you about Mount Arbel, that's it right there. I don't know if I've got a video. Nope, no video this time. So, yeah, I mean, you can tell, I don't know if you can tell, it's another night where I was all alone on the beach at the Sea of Galilee as the sun set. It floored me that nobody would go down there. It was the most beautiful, peaceful place. I guess I should be glad that nobody went down there because it wouldn't have been nearly as peaceful. But birds would be flying by. The water would just be kind of gently flowing up onto the shore. I would be picking up mass quantities of rocks to bring back, and it is absolutely gorgeous. And I was so sad. It's really interesting. When Jesus, when I think it's Matthew, says that after the events of the Transfiguration and what he sees and does up in Caesarea Philippi, and says after this, he set his face resolutely towards Jerusalem. And what that means is he knew that this was his last trip to Jerusalem. He was on his way. Everything else was done. There was one thing left to do. And I remember that night, as I sat there on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, mourning the fact that I was going to have to leave and go back to Jerusalem the next day. I can remember thinking, now I don't know exactly how Jesus feels as he left the Sea of Galilee for the last time and for the reason that he had to leave it. But I kind of had this, I was like, man, no wonder he picked up here to be his home base. No wonder he decided this was where he was going to live during those 3.5 years. Absolutely one of the most beautiful and peaceful places on earth, especially after having been in Jerusalem. That's a little piece of basalt rock. That's the stuff, it's everywhere in Galilee. And it's the stuff mainly that first century homes were built out of. Obviously, bigger chunks than this one. But that's a piece of the basalt. As it got darker, that's Tiberias across the Sea of Galilee. It's just the most beautiful place. I'd go back in a heartbeat and spend weeks. Oh, I thought this was funny. We have it all: beer, wine, and whiskey, and a very hot bartender. And that's their hot bartender right there, Ariel. And it's like a lot of us would sit in there at night after all of the different things that we had done with the group. And I was in there one night with Michael Card and a couple of the other people from the group. And he came walking up, and Michael looked at him and goes, "Are you the hot bartender?" And he goes, he has this really thick Israeli accent. He's like, yes, I am. And he kind of did this. He was like, "Am I not?" And everybody was like, "Well, So anyway, I thought that was funny. There's my Israeli sunflower seeds, which I was very, very happy to find at a roadside convenience store. All right. The next day, we left Ein Gev, and we set our faces resolutely towards Jerusalem. You can see we drove right by Bet Shan. Just the path as you go down the Jordan Valley, which that little green strip there is the Jordan Valley. As you go down, it's like that's the path. It would have taken him right by Bet Shan. And so I asked the guide, I was like, "You think Jesus ever been in this city?" And he said, "Almost assuredly." So another opportunity to walk where Jesus walked. All right, this is just, it was rainy that day. And so as we were driving down the Jordan Valley, just to kind of give you an idea of the scenery, these are like, I think this is a Palestinian village. We're in the West Bank, and if it was an Israeli village, it would be surrounded by a much, much higher, thicker, and more impressive wall. But they've got these weird, they've kind of built up these mud or these earthen things behind them, but not, you can see them from the Jordan River. And so I don't know what the deal is there. A lot of the stuff in that part of Israel, the things are built up for security. And so it could be that this is a Palestinian city and that back in the day they were worried about what was coming from this direction. And so that's why the earthworks are built up on this side. I don't know. It could have, maybe it's just it's windy and the wind comes down here and so they wanted it to blow over the top of their house. I have no idea. Anytime we asked our guide about the politics and the hostilities in the region, I think we figured out that the guides were not really supposed to talk about that with us, other than to, they really weren't supposed to talk about it with us. All right. Okay, so we stopped at this. I told you guys about this maybe my first week back. As a matter of fact, Daniela might have shown this the week that I was still gone. We stopped at this weird place in the West Bank, not too far from Israel, or from Jerusalem. And it was a combination of a gas station, convenience store, bakery, restaurant, bar, nightclub. It was the strangest thing I've ever been around. And we all went in and we were getting our coffee and things to eat and stuff. And this guy here, he brought out his camel. And when we pulled in, the camel was actually in a parking spot. And our bus pulled in just right next to him. You know, like, oh yeah, that's the camel's parking spot. This is our parking spot. When we got off the bus and we were walking around in front, which would be, you know, kind of this direction from the camel is where that weird building was. As we were walking around there, another bus came in and didn't even honk the horn at the camel and the guy. Just kind of nudged him out of the way. I mean, I think he really did touch the camel at one point with his bus, and the camel got up and was, you know, kind of cranky about it, and they got him out of that parking spot. And I remember thinking to myself that our bus driver, Kamal, who is he's an Israeli Arab Christian. Kamal used his horn often. And I was like, yeah, Kamal would have at least given that camel a beep beep. But yeah. Oh, and I think this is a video of me. There we go. Hands up, everybody. Hands up. Hands up. Well, go with me, Muhammad. He's like, this dude's huge. Hands up, hands up, hands up. And I think there's one more. Getting down. Watch the camel. He's not happy.
He looks mad.
Oh, I guess it was before that. The camel, when he was going down, he had like, I'm not a small guy, right? I'm 6'4". I think I weigh about 225, something around there. And so I wasn't sure about even getting on the camel. But there were a couple of people from our tour group that were not as tall as I am, but probably outweighed me by a good 50 to 100 pounds. And they got on the camel, and the camel got up, no problem. And so I thought, well, okay, why not? And so I got on the camel, and I think there was like the straw that broke the camel's back. It's like the camel was not happy when he was getting back down, and he kind of starts going, you know, doing this weird thing. And I'm like, I think he's mad. And the guy, the handler, I mean, I don't know what you call that guy, but he got in the camel's face and he went like that. And I was just like, huh. And then the camel finally went ahead and eased down into his where he was going to finally end up. But yeah, that was, I thought, if there's ever going to be anybody on our tour that it ends up part of one of those camel fail videos, it's going to be me. And thankfully, I'm still thankful, God. Thank you very much. It wasn't. Beautiful. There's more of those. It might be the same place. I don't think it is, though. Anyway. Getting in closer to Jerusalem, there's the walls of Jerusalem that are about 500, 800 years old, something like that anyways. They're pretty old. But they are not the walls that Jesus would have seen. The walls that Jesus would have seen are down about 30 feet. And any stones that we see, and we're going to see some as we walk along the edges of the city, any stones that we see that are first century stones, because I can't remember the guy's name. He was a Turk, but whoever it is that rebuilt these walls, if he could, he used the foundation of Herod's wall, because Herod's wall is incredibly well built, and you can tell the difference really, even in the quality of the stones. Here we are driving through downtown Jerusalem. This is kind of to the west of the old city. Wait a minute. Nope, yep, that's what it is. All right, so when we got to Jerusalem, we went to the Israel Museum. And the Israel Museum has everything Israel, everything from the Old Testament, everything from the New Testament. I mean, it's just one of the most interesting museums I've ever been in, based on the things that I'm interested in. And one of the things that blew me away more than anything else is this scale model of first century Jerusalem. And so I can't remember what scale it's on, but it's little, right? It's like kind of like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood little. But of course, instead of just having, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, it's got all the neighborhoods of first century Jerusalem. And I thought that was one of the coolest things I had ever seen. Here you can see the Temple Mount in the background, the temple itself right there, the Holy of Holies and the holy place, and the walls around the temple, and the Antonia Fortress that Pilate and his legions would have been in, watching the temple like a hawk. You can see that from the top of the Antonia Fortress, they could look down into the temple, and if there was ever a problem, there was a ramp that led right down into the court of the Gentiles, and we'll talk more about that as we go along tonight. Another view of first century Jerusalem. Oh, it's a video. And I think there are going to be several where I try to give everybody, give a complete idea. See, the Temple Mount is massive. Blows me away how big the Temple Mount is. Now, this is the model of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount and everything. A couple of days after this, our last day actually, our last day in Israel, we went up onto the Temple Mount, and I was blown away by how big it is. It's like, it must be a fifth of the entire old city of Jerusalem was taken up just by this Temple Mount. Oh, that's the same video. Okay, so just a close-up of some of the... Okay, so there's the Antonia Fortress in the background. I think this might have been part of Herod's palace complex. But it just kind of gives you an idea of what it looked like. Oh, there we go. Doing a flyby. You can see Herod's palace, another one, the great big swimming pool, all that stuff. This, I was like, what's the deal with the giant Hershey Kiss, white chocolate? It turns out this is the top of the part of the museum that houses the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so this, I don't know if you can tell, or if you know what a scroll looks like. If you have a scroll kind of from a round cylinder, and at the end are these kind of things that look very much like this. And so that's what they tried to do, is create a place for the sanctuary of the book, I think they call it, that looked like a scroll. Very interesting. Unfortunately, we weren't allowed to take pictures when we got inside to that to where the Dead Sea Scrolls are actually displayed. If you were with us when we talked about being in Qumran, which is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were were copied and where they were found. Then I talked about this a little bit. Down below this thing, and when you get inside, the whole thing looks like you're inside of a scroll. It is really wild. And there is, going around the center rod, which would have come straight down from this, down, below the floor, is this, well, I think it's like 100-foot section of the scroll of the book of Isaiah. And it is so incredibly well preserved. But like I said, we weren't allowed to take pictures in there. I wish that I had thought to Google it and find some pictures for you, but maybe I'll do that next week. We'll talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls next week, because not really many pictures from in there today. I don't know what it looks like an old tree, doesn't it? But it's a sculpture of some kind. I think that's supposed to be a horse, and I don't know. I never did get a straight answer about what that was. Oh, I think this is the hail. Yeah, there we go.
It's hailing on us in Jerusalem. Hellfire, brimstone, hail. All wrath of God type stuff. He's like,
some of the people on my tour really thought I was funny, and some of them would just kind of go, Ghostbusters quote. There I posed with the original apple from the Garden of Eden. And this is down in the museum. Now, when it shows us running through the hail and to get, we were still down at the Jerusalem model, and our guide was still pointing things out and teaching us and stuff, but it started, weather just got out of hand. And so he was like, let's go inside the museum for a little while, and then we'll come out afterwards, and we'll see the rest of this. So, okay, I wanted to show you this. When Jesus is at the wedding at Cana in Galilee, and his mother says, they're out of wine. And he's like, woman, why is that my problem? Although that sounds like he's dissing her. Woman was a very, very tender thing to call a female in the first century. He never calls her mom. He calls her woman. But it's not a term of disrespect. But I wonder if she thought that was weird. Anyway, and she says to the slaves, or the servants, I don't know if they were, anyway, she says, do whatever he tells you to. And so Jesus says, all right, go and draw water into those ceremonial washing jars, and then bring them to me, and then take some of it out and take it to the host, and it turned into wine during that time. That's what these are. These are ceremonial ritual water jar container thingies. And so this is massive. Michael Card said that he was teaching a class one time in Pennsylvania somewhere, I want to say. And there was a girl that was taking the class that came to him and said, you know what, I don't really want to take this class because I'm a numbers person and I don't want to write a paper, and so I think I'm going to drop it. And he said, okay, well then let me give you an assignment. And so like one of the people that said that to him, he gave the assignment of, he said, I want you to go through and I want you to count up every word that Jesus said, right? Not overlapping, kind of taking all of the different stories that are the same. Take all the words that he said and all the time that we have, and I want you to figure out what actual percentage of Jesus's life we have that we can read about. And it turned out to be like 0.001% or something. I mean, something absolutely crazy and minuscule. But that was one assignment that he gave to one person that didn't like to write a paper and just kind of liked numbers. The other thing that he gave to somebody, because he was always interested to find out, is how much water would fit in one of these, and then based on how much, I think there was like 6 of them. Is that how many there was? And then based on how much wine is in there after Jesus is done turning it into wine, and considering the fact that it's the best wine that this guy's ever tasted, how much was this wine worth? What kind of gift is this that Jesus gives these people? And it was something like $30,000 worth of wine, in modern terms. So not an insubstantial amount of wine. These are standing stones. It's a model, really. And so I don't know. I've got a picture of that dude right here. It's like there's so much to see. And we're there for the Life of Christ tour. And so he hustled us past a lot of this Old Testament stuff. Standing stones, though, in ancient Canaan, ancient Israel, were a huge deal. And they were, in the most ancient of times, these things represented gods to the people of Canaan. And you can see this one's been sketched on it. If we could see a closer up picture, it's like a person. But in ancient Canaan, they would have associated these stones with different gods. And in Joshua, when the people are getting ready to cross over the Jordan River and God stops the river so that they can walk over on dry land, God tells Joshua, he says, I want one person from each tribe, each of the 12 tribes, to pick up a stone as you're going through. And I want you then to stack them on the other side of the Jordan River, the side that we're on currently here, right, where Jerusalem is and everything. The other side is Jordan. But so they came across from Jordan into the Promised Land, and God had them pick up these stones, not these ones in particular. I'm sure that those are lost to history because they go way back, 2,000 years BC, something like that. Anyway, but they would have looked like this. And I always thought they were somebody pick up a little rock and they would they were picking up these massive pylons, and then they would stack them. And God says to Joshua, then when your children see these standing stones and they ask you, why are those stones stacked up like that? What's the deal with the standing stones? God said, that's when you tell them, that's when our fathers crossed over into the Promised Land on dry land. And so it's a memorial is what it is. Now, that's not what these are. These are pagan worship ritual things. But this is what Joshua chapter 2, I guess, is talking about. And God does that all the time. And now the one that we have currently that we practice here at Riverside every weekend is the Lord's Supper. And it's for us to remember, but it is also for us to teach those who are coming after, so that the kids, when they say, why do we do this? That we can talk about our Savior, that we can talk about Jesus. And this is the ancient form of that. Yeah, there's that dude or chick, I don't know. Dude, I think. I don't know why I got a video of this. Oh, you're going to get to see see? That was a person. Or a deity, probably. Okay. Oh, this is cool. This is a person's bone, and this is a spike. And it is the only known proof of Roman crucifixions with spikes instead of just tied up. And for a long time, up until like the 60s, into the 70s maybe even, I don't remember exactly when it is that he found this, but for a long time, people believed that the New Testament was wrong because they said there's no evidence of the Romans ever nailing anyone to a cross. That's something that was made up by Constantine in the 3rd century when he designed all of this, when he designed the Christian religion. And so 1970s, 1980s, something like that, an archaeological team found this in a pile of bones that it was known. This is just they threw the dead after they had been crucified into this pit, and they found it there. The reason that this one still has the spike is because it's bent, and so they couldn't get it out. And so he said, the guy that actually was part of the team that found this archaeological find, he came to Pepperdine when Judy and I were going to school there, and he did one summer, I think the summer of 91, I was there, and we did a New Testament archaeology class. Well, I did. And it was a 2-week class from like 9 in the morning until 6 at night every day. And the guy that found that spike was the teacher of our class. It was really cool. But yeah, that's what that is. It's the only proof that Romans used the spikes to nail people to the cross. Okay, here we are back at the model. And so this just give you an idea. That's the Temple Mount, and it is massive. And the temple itself standing up. If you were standing in this, like this is the court of the Gentiles over here. Solomon's colonnade there goes all the way around the whole thing. And so when you read about Solomon's colonnade, it's not just this spot, it's everything all around. That's where Peter preaches the first sermon in the history of the church. But inside of that here is this is the court of the Gentiles out here. If you were standing in the court of the Gentiles up next to one of these columns, I mean, you'd look like an ant. Those things are massive, and that right there, the temple itself, the Holy of Holies, and the holy place are contained in there. That, if you've ever seen a picture of Jerusalem and you see the Dome of the Rock, which now sits right there on the actual Temple Mount, the top of the Dome of the Rock would reach halfway up, right at the top of the doors. And then this just skyrocketed on beyond that. And so it just gives you an idea of the scale of this thing. It was massive. Thousands of people could mill around in this area here. And then you've got, right here is the court of the women. This is the court of the Gentiles. Anybody could come into the court of the Gentiles, as long as you weren't deformed in any way. So like when you read in Acts about Peter and John, they heal the guy that can't walk. He's sitting outside of the Beautiful Gate. The reason he's sitting outside of the Beautiful Gate is he's not allowed in here. And so when Peter and John heal him, for the first time in his life, he is able to walk in to the temple. I mean, for a Jew, that would have to be the most amazing thing that they had ever experienced in their lives. The Ethiopian eunuch would not have been allowed in here. The outskirts of this would have been as close as he could get. But if you were a non-disabled Gentile, you could come in here, man or woman. Then, once you got here, only Jews could go inside of these walls here. And so this is called the court of the women, because Jewish men and Jewish women could go in there. But once you got to that little gate thing right there and went beyond that, only Jewish men could go there. And then once you got to this, to the holy place and the Holy of Holies, only priests could go in there. And so we'll see some pictures of that as we go along. That's just what it would have looked like from, no, that wouldn't be from the Mount of Olives, but yeah, so, another flyby. I think they were hurrying me at that point. That's why I started walking a lot faster. I wanted to do a walk around the whole thing. And I did walk around the whole thing, just not all at once. You had to be pretty wealthy to live inside the walls of the city. There I am, outside of the old city. I am a giant compared to those. There's another view of the Temple Mount. And when Peter preaches his sermon, and thousands of people are baptized that first day, this is probably where they are. He was right. That's Solomon's colonnades there. He was probably up here in one of these, and these are steps that lead down to a giant courtyard, and there are mikvahs everywhere. You don't see them here. They're not. They didn't bother going ahead and putting them there. But mikvahs were ceremonial washing baths that the Jews, before you would go into the temple, and there's a gate there, there's a gate there, there's a gate there, there's a gate there. There are gates on this side, there's gates on the other side, there's gates. It's like there are gates everywhere. And so wherever you were, before you went into the temple, all around it were these mikvah. And so you would go through the mikvah to wash yourself, to clean yourself, before you went into God's house. And so when Peter baptizes thousands, well, Peter didn't do it by himself, but when the early church baptizes thousands and thousands and thousands, and overnight goes from 120 people to, scholars think, maybe anywhere around 5, 6, 7,000 that first day, because it was 3,000 men. That's how they did it. There were dozens of mikvahs out here. And on the last day, when we go up on the Temple Mount, we end up, the last thing we did is we ended up on these steps. They're still there. And I was like, this is where Peter preached his sermon? The guy said, yeah. And so I got a picture of me standing like right about there. Not as impressive as Peter, but still, I was pleased to be there. Another view of the temple and the giants on the far side threatening the city of Jerusalem. Oh. The Antonia Fortress. Like I said, it looks right down into the court of the Gentiles. And if you've ever watched the TV show, it was on, I think, NBC, AD, The Bible Continues, they do a lot of obviously a lot of it takes place in the temple. And so they do a lot. It's like they do a great job of being historically accurate with all of that. So we were kind of looking at that at a similar angle there. But, we don't need to watch that whole thing again. This is all the court of the Gentiles all the way around here. This is Solomon's colonnade or Solomon's porch. It is sometimes called. Antonia Fortress is there. All these different gates to get in. So, court of the Gentiles, court of the women, court of Israel or court of the men. There is the altar where the animals were burned up. There's the slaughter tables over here. And then the priest would carry the sacrifice and the blood up into the holy place, past the veil into the Holy of Holies, where on Yom Kippur he would sacrifice and atone for the sins of all of Israel. This is just another picture of it. I thought this was interesting in this one. The chamber of lepers. You know, when Jesus heals a leper, I think he healed a bunch of lepers actually in this story, 10 maybe. And he says to them, go present yourself to the priests and offer the sacrifices required in the law. I always thought, that's a weird thing. Go present yourself to the priests. Why? Because they had to make sure that you were really healed before they allowed you back into Jewish society, this is where you would go. You would come to the temple and you would go to the court of lepers, chamber of lepers, and you would go inside, and whatever priest had gotten on the bad side of the high priest, I imagine this had to be a terrible job, right? Because the priest would go over an ex-leper inch by inch, literally, because they had to make sure this person was seriously healed. There is no record of this ever happening outside of Jesus, right? Now, there's not an extra biblical record of Jesus having done this, just in the New Testament. But this is where they would go. And they would, and if they could prove that they were leprosy free, then the priest would say, offer the sacrifices and go back home. And if you couldn't prove that, then you went back to the leper colony. So, don't know what the deal is with this one. Never did learn all of that. Next time. Second temple. Okay, this is fascinating to me. For so long, like, I don't know, there's Solomon's temple, right? That's the first temple. And it is destroyed by Babylon in 5th century BC. When they destroy all of Jerusalem and knock everything down, they take away Daniel and all of these other Jewish boys to Babylon, and then Persia conquers Babylon, and then Persia has a much more, they're much nicer, I guess you could say, especially to the Jews, and so they let the Jews go back to Jerusalem, and Nehemiah goes back. He was the cupbearer for the king of Persia. Ezra is the scribe. He goes back, and together they rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, and they rebuild the second temple, right? The first one was Solomon's temple. This second one is Zerubbabel's temple, I guess you would say. He was the king at the time, the king of Israel at the time. And so the king of Persia let them rebuild the temple. Now, it was not this temple, okay? This is a massive temple that was built by Herod. When Zerubbabel and Nehemiah and Ezra rebuild the second temple, they do it on a very small scale. It would have been pretty sad looking. So when Herod decides, hey, I want to build a massive temple. This would have been one of the largest temples in the Roman world. I think there was one temple maybe that was bigger than this temple in all of the Roman world. And when Herod decides he wants to do that, he has to haggle. He has to really deal with the priesthood, because you can't tear down the old temple, right? You can't tear down the second temple that Zerubbabel and Nehemiah and Ezra rebuilt hundreds of years before. And so he's got to make a deal that is okay with the priests, where the sacrifices continue. And so they he builds this thing around the old ratty second temple, and then as he gets this place finished, where then the sacrifices can continue, then they're able to tear down the old one and make it everything all new. But that's why it's like, I always thought it was weird that they would call this the second temple, because I'm like, what about Zerubbabel's temple? What about, well, this is that temple never ceased to exist, right? The temple was always there from the time of Zerubbabel and Nehemiah and Ezra until 70 A.D. when it's torn down by Rome. So, yeah, just interesting little tidbit. Okay, just another picture of the temple from outside. Court of the Gentiles, showed you that earlier. And this is the shrine of the book that I was telling you about. The Dead Sea Scrolls are kept in there, and there were no pictures allowed. So after we went through the Dead Sea Scrolls thing, and I will show you pictures next week about that, we ate at the Dead Sea Scroll bar and grill. I mean, it wasn't a bar, but I thought you could get beer there. But I got pizza. Now, they didn't think it was funny that I asked for pepperoni. They don't have meat pizza in Israel that I ever found, because you're not allowed to mix dairy and meat in the same meal. And so you can't have a cheeseburger. You can't have an egg McMuffin with cheese and sausage on it, But the cheese pizza was pretty good. Another view of just part of the museum. View of downtown West Jerusalem. Now, I was telling you about how the walls of Jerusalem are 500, 600 years old, built by a Turk. And you can see it's like he used whatever was laying around. This is kind of the top of the first century walls. There was probably a gate right there. And so as you walked by, it blew me away. But you can kind of see the difference in workmanship. Here you've got part of Herod's wall, and then you've got this stuff just kind of piled on top. I mean, it's still there. It was good. But Herod's walls of Jerusalem were a work of art. Everything that he did was a work of art. Okay, why isn't that moving? Is that the last thing that I have? No, it is not. So why is it not moving? And there we go, walking into Herod's gate. Well, this thing decided, okay, now it decides to go ahead and start up. Let's see if it'll let us do this now. Okay, there we go. So yeah, we are leaving the Israel Museum. We had to actually drive over to Jerusalem when we walked in through Herod's gate. And I just got a few pictures here that I'll show you before we close up of walking through the city of Jerusalem. That is, just mind-boggling to me. And you had to watch out because cars would zip up and down this road. And so you'd hear, it reminded me of Wayne's World, because all of a sudden you hear, car, and everybody would scat to the side, and the car would zoom. It was like they just were like, yeah, people are getting out of the way or else people are dying, is what it seemed like to me. And little scooters, Harley Davidson motorcycles, just everything that you could imagine. It blew me away. Birthplace of the Virgin Mary. I don't know. I don't know why they think she was born in Jerusalem when she is from Nazareth. I have a feeling that it just seemed like a cool thing to say that she was born in Jerusalem. And so when Constantine's mom comes and is looking for all of the holy places, and she asks where Mary was born, somebody points to a place in Jerusalem and says, right there. So she built a little church there. This is not it, but it is on the site of where she built it. Picture of Mary and her mother, Saint Anne. And I'm going to show you a video from inside the church, because this was one of my favorite things that we would do. We would go into these ancient cathedrals. This isn't really a cathedral. This is more of a chapel, but it is built specifically for acoustics. And I started filming about halfway through the first verse of Holy, 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 but you can kind of hear us singing. I apologize because sometimes you can hear me singing. I was trying to make it so that you would only hear the people, but I failed. So here you go. T. So yeah, that's the Church of St. Anne. And that is Bethesda, not Bethesda, Maryland, but the Bethesda pool where Jesus heals the man that has been blind from birth. So we'll talk about that next week. We'll pick up with that. And I will bring stuff to talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls, give you a better idea of what that looks like inside of the shrine of the book. But until then, I will see you virtually this weekend, and pray that Alaskans do good and that we move into stage 2 rapidly and we can start having people in this building again. So thanks, everybody, and I will see you next week. Well, next weekend.